Okay, back again, round two. Another well-balanced episode, and I'm very excited to chat with Meg Langston today. So can't wait to talk with her. We're going to talk all about iron overload, and just she's very experienced in this industry and was one of my role models as well, getting into it. So I'm super excited to learn from her. So let me add her in here, and we'll get this party started. Let's see.
Hi.
There we go. Hi, Meg. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry.
Nice to finally meet you. I know we've chatted on the phone.
I know, and we are like a stone's throw from each other, which is ironic, but
I know you live in the same area, right? All right, remind me where you are.
yep, same area.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
so dealing with this heat wave right now.
I have a sweatshirt on. I know. I have my heat up to 60 or my air up to 65 or down, I suppose I should say. I'm freezing myself out because it's so hot.
I
But
know. I want to be in fall weather, but it's just not. It's not the time.
and I'm so bad because as soon as it turns August 1, I'm quite literally no, it's fall. It needs to happen. And I'm from the Midwest, so I feel like it does start to happen sooner. It usually goes through kind of cold waves and some hot waves, but Atlanta is just I love it here, but also I'm give me more seasons. So,
I know. We literally have fall for like a week, pretty much. So
yeah.
Well, I'm so thankful for you being here. Thank you for hopping on and chatting with me. I just been trying to create these episodes that are on a variety of topics and things that people can kind of, take some chunks with them as they go on their journey. So
Yeah. Cool.
I always start with an intro. So definitely want to just get to know you a little bit and kind of what got you into this space, and your story I think is really fascinating. So would love to hear that. And then I did ask some questions. So we have questions specifically about iron overload. I think that's a conversation that I too am definitely undereducated in. So can't wait to chat and learn a little bit more about that too. So we'll start with you and all your story and all that.
Yeah. I will try to make it different than I normally what I have been on a few different podcasts that I just keep sharing the same story, but it's because it's a core memory of when I can remember my health really shifting. But essentially I was a competitive soccer player. I was, pretty involved in the only sport was soccer, but how I defined health was very much by first performance. So how was I doing on the soccer field? And I did, of course, I was not of course, but I was a high school girl that did care a lot about my aesthetics and wanting to look a certain way. But I would say that once I got to college is really where I tried to figure out more so how to identify with health and what that looked like. And for me, a lot of what it looked like is a body image. And I make the joke, I'm 33, I make the joke that really where it started for me was looking at the magazines, because back in the day they didn't have Instagram and Facebook wasn't thing. And I feel so old saying that. It's me talking about how I used to love trolls, those little toys.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to find out information, I really couldn't figure out, how do I define health? So a lot of what it was based on body image that were, talking about low calories, low carbs, or even if they explained macronutrients, it was really based on, this type of food will get this aesthetic. And it was not really a figuring out how biofeedback works and how your body responds, what's healthy, what's not healthy. So I solely, defined my health by my aesthetics, which I think a lot of people still do, and how a lot of people in our industry became in our industry because we were so confused on what health actually meant. So long story short, I tried a ton of different things like most people did. I did a lot of extreme, marathons, triathlons, bodybuilding competitions, all these things that manipulated my diet. I was very, I was paid to be in a sports bra. So I did a lot of things that were where I was basically in the best shape of my life. And yet I had no period. I suffered from anxiety. I remember somebody literally telling me, an old boyfriend, who was like, "You're just always so worrisome." And I was like, gosh, that's just must be who I am. And, in my long pursuit of health, which actually started from first learning about period health, which is why I'm such a big advocate for body literacy. When I started to really define what that was how I was able to, like, what body literacy was, meaning when my menstrual cycle was coming, was I ovulating, what was my cycle length, and whatnot. I started to learn about thyroid health, and then defining my health not on my aesthetics, but instead in those terms of, again, menstrual cycle, and was I, having PMS symptoms and whatnot. And I began to realize that I wasn't actually healthy despite the way that I had looked. And the more I pursued actually healing my body and nourishing my body and rest, and not eliminating everything, but actually bringing all these foods in, that's when I really started to actually feel better. And my personality wasn't such a worrisome personality. It was that I was really not healthy internally. And so I had all these not crazy, but like anxious thoughts and things that were not define my personality. And I don't talk to this ex-boyfriend, but I kind of want to be like, that was not me. Okay, first of all. But yeah, hopefully that's, helpful. And so, like, at least how I got into this industry. Other than that, I have 2 boys. I have a 9-month-old and a 4-year-old. And I have a husband. I have 2 who we take.
He's in there somewhere.
Yeah, he's in there somewhere.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Well, yeah, no, I think that the story from everyone I've talked to as well, like, their stories are so similar, and we market. And even, magazines were the thing though, but like the diets were always on the front, and the way people looked. And I even saw a post today from somewhere, the world of social media, but just about how we do define things by looks. And it's like, well, yeah, if you can run 50 miles, that's great, but how are you doing internally? And I think that that's something that, especially when I started following you in the beginning, you were saying things that I had never heard before. And I come from a training background, and I was like, this lady's either crazy or she's like so right, and I'm gonna like eventually believe her. And to this day, I love that you've changed that trajectory in that way, and have started conversations that are hard for people to hear, but I think the way that the future is going, I think it's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it is amazing this is the one thing that is so powerful about Instagram, is as long as we have healthy boundaries, it really can be used for good. And I think, like you said, changing the language, and it's not just me, it's so many women, and it's really, getting some momentum. And I think women are really starting to redefine health and beauty, and that is amazing.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome that we're finally asking questions and like really challenging ourselves to see how we do feel, because I think that we do need to measure it on that. So that's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's great. Okay, so your passion is definitely women's health, and that's definitely your expertise. So it seems like from all the years that you've been doing this now, iron overload is definitely one of those topics, but other things that you feel like women typically kind of come to you for, that you almost always end up doing over and over again?
Yeah. So it's so funny. I was actually just talking to somebody that was asking about my business, and, she was asking questions of like, how did you get to where you are, and all the things. And I was telling her, one thing that I do not do is I don't niche. And everyone has told me, you have to go into a niche. You have to go into a niche. And I'm like, why? Especially as like a health, practitioner and somebody that's an advocate for women's health, it doesn't make sense to me, because when you really start to understand the body and how the body operates, it runs off of macronutrients, micronutrients, and the very thing that impacts digestive, thyroid health, infertility is almost all the same, right? Stress, inflammation. Are you absorbing and utilizing nutrients? Are you eating enough? Is your blood sugar balanced? And so at the end of the day, it's the foundations that really matter, that make it, or make your health, or I would say put you in a state of dysfunction. And so the number one thing that I think that most of my clients, whether they come to me through gut issues, infertility, autoimmune conditions, that they are doing besides looking into iron overload is blood sugar dysregulation. So it's either that they are not eating enough, period, which a lot of females aren't. It's really hard. It takes so much effort enough. And even for me, like that's my, if there's something going on with my health, it's because I did not eat enough. Like, oh shoot, it's been a whole week where I put everybody else first and I did not eat enough. And so I understand that. And I come from a place of just like being like, I get it. It takes a lot of effort. However, that is going to either make your health or break your health. I mean, blood sugar dysregulation can look like brain fog, waking up in the middle of the night just to pee. It can look like crashing at 3 to 4 p.m. It can look like hangry. It can look like really a lot of anxiety. So there's so many different symptoms that it can portray itself as. But it really is just about combining your meals appropriately. I think that eating within the first 30 minutes is one of the most important things that you can do. And from there, depending on each person, eating just 3 meals or eating every 3 to 4 hours really is just dependent on like where the person is at and schedule and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I think that that's like the one that almost everyone has ever come to me for as well. It's all like, you have to start there. And if you don't, you know, you're, like you said, they're all connected. So it's hard to niche down. I've struggled with that too. I'm like, but I love everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, even training, like I love fitness training and the way that that shaped me in that way. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how you do it and how you are metabolically supporting your body at the same time. But
yeah. Think about like making sure that we're eating enough food. So we're really talking about, and it doesn't have to be like this. I hate when people are like, food is fuel. I'm like, no, I mean, yes, but also like food is enjoyment. You get to participate in life. Like that's why I'm so against, elimination diets, is because it's literally a part of life and it's a really joyful, fun thing. But truly, when we break it down into our bodies, it is the macronutrients and micronutrients that convert cholesterol, vitamin D, that our thyroid hormone appropriately, that move iron the way that it should be, that help our, support progesterone levels and estrogen detoxification or estrogen levels, and, literally fuel every cell in our body, or, so it's so when we are eating these foods and balancing our blood sugar, we're literally just consuming the things that help our body run the way that it should be. And when we don't have that, or we're lacking that, it's putting stress on our body. So we can chase all these supplements and all these protocols or all these fun things like castor oil packs that I often talk about. But if you're not doing that foundation, then you're probably going to keep hitting that, your head against the wall, because you're not actually going to get the healing that you really want, because your body's still going to be in that stress state.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely, I think the big one that comes up every single week on this, on these calls. So
yeah, so
good to hear it again.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump into iron. I guess give the audience a brief overview of just how this mineral functions in the body and how obviously it's useful in different stages. And then we'll kind of go into, symptoms of iron overload, how you become iron overloaded, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I think it was either from Morley or Josh Rubin that told me this example, and I can't remember where I first learned it, but it was one of those two, and we were in class, and they had basically talked about the cell being a nightclub, and I was like, well, this is weird, but hang with me, because that's where I'm going to go, because it's a really great just kind of just example of how you can picture the cells working with iron, the blood, and minerals. So when we picture our cell, we can kind of think of a little bit of a nightclub, and there's a bouncer on either end that should be letting iron in or out of the cell. And so what happens is we are bombarded with iron because we have been grew up on iron fortified foods. So this could look like Pop-Tarts, cereal, pastas. You can hear my Chicago accent. Pastas. Maybe we had birth control. Maybe we had, just different medications that blew up something called ceruloplasmin. And so essentially we're bombarded with iron, and you have this nightclub of a cell. And so copper is on each side, which should be letting iron in and out from the cell to the blood, from the cell to the blood. And what happens is we have a lot of iron going in, but not enough bouncers showing up. Or more importantly, we don't have the manager, which is like the retinol, saying like, hey, copper, you need to show up. You need to let iron in out of the cell. So again, you have your nightclub, iron's going in because of all these iron fortified foods, just natural iron going on in the body, but we don't have enough of the bouncers moving iron the way that it should be in and out of the cell. And we especially don't have that retinol, that vitamin A, not beta carotene, but retinol, to say, hey manager, you're there, but like you're not actually getting into the enzyme to be able to let iron in out of the cell the way that you should be. So that's where we get something called iron overload. And for a lack of a better term, it can get stuck in the tissues. We see this when it's stuck in the macrophages, and the immune system, and the liver, and the gut. We see it feeding pathogens where people have chronic, they go on so many different protocols, and they're chasing, you know, parasites and candida protocols, but really they have iron overload, and that's actually what's feeding these pathogens. Or they're having like really high cholesterol markers, and that looks like the inflammation within their body. Their ferritin levels, a marker that I believe it was Leslie Calvé. He was a researcher on iron and copper, and he was the first one, I believe, that talked about ferritin levels being at a 20, where a lot of Western medicine doctors will say it needs to be at like 60 or 70. But what we see is that when that stored ferritin, that ferritin marker is higher than 20, it's usually a huge sign of inflammation in the body, and we see a lot of iron getting stored into the tissues, which is inappropriate. We want it moving throughout the body to be utilized, not getting stored into the tissues.
I'm curious too, does like the iron overload act similarly as like copper toxicity would as it's getting clogged? Like, is that mindset the same essentially?
So rather than copper toxicity, I think that copper dysregulation could be a word that's maybe more appropriate, because there could be a lot of bouncers that are around the cell, but there's not retinol, the manager, showing up. So it's not that there's a toxic amount of copper, potentially, but rather how is their retinol status looking? Do they have too little retinol where the manager just needs to help shovel them into the door or into the enzyme to be able to be utilized well? That's typically what is the case. And when we go to doctors, and again, I should be very careful. I'm saying this, like, I am not advocating that you can't listen to your doctor at all. I think everything is, what I'm saying is for information for you to utilize and do your own research and bring up with your doctor and have a conversation around, or get a team around you that you feel like can help, talk through this with you and present more information for you. But what we see is that just like very commonly not getting a full thyroid panel, we may not be getting a full iron panel. And that matters because if we're just testing, iron saturation, TIBC, ferritin levels, then we may not be getting the full iron picture of what's actually going on. Why are these iron markers high? Is it because we don't actually have something called ceruloplasm, which is bioavailable copper? Is it because we have no copper? Is it because we have no retinol? So is it, is our vitamin D really high, which can deplete liver retinol? And, so they're getting a full picture allows us to kind of figure out what's going on and why that is, and help us, take the right steps forward to removing that inflammation and that rust in the body to be able to create more energy and get the body moving the way that it should be.
That makes sense. Okay, so then if you were experiencing iron overload, what symptoms do you typically have?
This is the hard part, is because they can be a lot. Like, one of the things that can be really common is excess estrogen symptoms or high histamine symptoms. So estrogen will increase histamine, and histamine will increase estrogen. And one of the things that we know about estrogen is that it's an antioxidant. And so when we have inflammation in the tissues, estrogen will go to the tissues in order to mitigate that inflammation. And so what we'll find is that these high estrogen symptoms, or estrogen dominant symptoms, heavy bleeding, endometriosis, cramping, clotting, too little bleeding. That was a lot of confusion on my post, but this is why I said 5 days is where I like a lot of bleeding, because if you want your natural iron recycling system to occur, and I can talk about more about that, of why, that matters. But, so it can look like infertility. It can look like high inflammatory markers. It can look like parasites, consistent consistent candida, so digestive issues. So there's a lot of different things that it can happen. And so back to that estrogen topic, I'm sure I didn't finish that, but that when estrogen gets stuck in the tissues, it gives those high estrogen dominant symptoms. And so we can be taking blood tests and taking Dutch tests. This is why I don't do Dutch testing in my practice, is because it can show up that we have normal estrogen within our blood, but we actually, or even in our urine analysis, but we actually have high estrogen in the tissues. And there's not really a test for that, but we can just kind of guess that that's what's going on. And as soon as we get the body to start recycling iron, whether that's iron donation, whether that's actually just getting the body to absorb and utilize these minerals that properly move iron, we start to see these estrogen dominant symptoms come down, and things like histamine issues come down, things like, the clotting, the heavy periods, all that start to regulate itself. The period starts to become more manageable, less pain-free, or less painful, more pain-free. And those symptoms are, they decrease.
So is it as simple as, avoiding high iron foods, or of course, like iron, or like the iron fortified foods, or is it even things like with, fruits and vegetables or meats that might have iron like in them? So what is the typical, basic protocol there?
Yeah. So I don't think you have to worry about anything with food. I really don't. So I think you had a question about like beef liver, or somebody asked a question on beef liver or something like that. Does it have too much iron in it? Somebody that's struggling with iron overload, I would not worry at all about, the foods that you're eating. For the most part, nature comes with the correct cofactors that help move iron. So beef liver has the retinol status in there. It has copper in there. It has magnesium in there. It has all the things that help mitigate inflammation in the body and help move iron appropriately. What I would feel uncomfortable doing, or at least question and talk through with your practitioners about, is supplementing with iron, whether that's in a prenatal, whether that's in a, they're asking you to take iron. I would just, talk to your doctor about it, become educated, and make a decision that feels right for you. That's something that I would not avoid. But foods, I would avoid, but foods I don't think you really have to avoid necessarily. So if you're looking to move iron appropriately in the body, things that we can do is, one, this is where I do still do GI map testing, is because if there is any kind of dysbiosis going on and we have leaky gut, it still can make it hard for our body to absorb and utilize the nutrients that we're consuming. So I do like to do a GI test, make sure that the body's absorbing and utilizing nutrients. But let's say that you couldn't afford that, or that wasn't something you were going to do, then just focusing on retinol-rich foods and copper-rich foods are a good place to start. So copper-rich foods can be like shellfish. So everyone talks about oysters, but there's tons of different shellfish. It can look like white potatoes. It can look like bee pollen. Those all have copper in it. Retinol-rich foods are going to be like heavy dairy products, beef liver. Copper is also found in beef liver. It can look like red meats, things like that are going to have retinol in there. Cod liver oil as well, or eating cod is going to be good too.
Well, I think it's so interesting that like people like to isolate these minerals and, be like, okay, I'm low in this. I need to just focus on this. But it's obvious that they have such a synergistic relationship that if one's off, one might also be elevated in a different way or whatever. So looking at it from a holistic point of view.
Yeah, it's
super
rare.
Interesting.
Unless someone's really sick, it's rarely that you ever isolate a mineral. Even magnesium, which runs over 42% of every enzymatic function in the body, so everything that helps the body run, that is something that you have to be careful with consuming, and that's supposed to be a very safe mineral that almost everyone's deficient in, because something called magnesium burn rate, we're all in a high stressed environment. Magnesium and B as in boy, B vitamins are the first to go. But if we isolate magnesium before our body's ready, we have to, and if our body's in a high stress state, we can actually get things like anxiety. We can feel anxiety. We can feel nauseous. We can feel off because our body's in too much of a high state stress. Our sodium potassium levels are off, where when we consume it actually makes us feel worse. So we have to be really careful. And that's why at the end of the day, managing blood sugar, eating, whole foods, all the things that are the hardest to do and stick with consistently are actually the things that really, bring health. Unless there's for a very long time, you've had some things that are going on. Sometimes it's helpful just to make sure there's no, nothing deeper going on as far as like a parasite or anything like that that's making it hard to absorb and utilize these nutrients.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a few more questions, and let's see. What would you recommend for someone who's been diagnosed as anemic from blood work?
I would ask for a full iron panel and then talk with somebody, get two opinions if it was me. I, definitely fall under the category that there's more nutritional and deficiencies that cause anemia markers, meaning low iron markers. But when we have the full picture, it's less that there's actually, you know, it's less that it shows that you're actually anemic. It's more so that it shows that you're not absorbing and utilizing copper well. You're not making ceruloplasmin, so bioavailable copper, because you don't have enough retinol. So if it were me, or if it was a client and they were diagnosed, I would say, hey, maybe get a second opinion and somebody that is doing a full iron panel. And then from there, do what feels right. Talk about it with your practitioners and do your own research and make plans from there. But it doesn't, in my opinion, always mean that you are straight anemic if we don't have the other markers that show how well we're moving iron in our body. Our body has an iron recycling system, and we never used to have to worry about this, but we never used to, back in the ancestral days, but we also were never eating, all these highly processed foods that have iron in them or that blow up, help us deplete ceruloplasmin and things like that. We're in those days where now that's happening more regularly. So it seems to be more a lack of nutrients versus necessarily low iron in the blood.
I'm just curious too, like out of maybe like 10 women, how many people do you typically work with that experience iron overload?
Oh, I would say almost all of them. Yeah. I mean, I feel
Wow.
like typically when people are coming to me, I'm like their last resort. They've gone to functional doctors, they've gone to everybody. So it's usually like the underlining thing that they're not addressing, or they didn't know. And it's really hard to, especially in the US, to, ignore all the iron fortified foods that most of us grew up eating. We didn't grow up eating liver and organ meats. We live in a really high stress state. Morley Robbins, who was one of my teachers on this, was saying that we live in more stress in a day than our ancestors did in a lifetime. And I hold that to be entirely true. I mean, we're bombarded by everything under the sun, from just like comparison to, Wi-Fi. And it's a lot of stress on our body. And so that, can cause many issues, including burning through minerals, digestive issues. So you're not absorbing and utilizing these foods that maybe you're eating. Yeah, I would say probably like
Everyone.
half out of 10.
I figured that answer was coming. Okay, so I think, let's see. Someone asked about cast iron skillets. So if they're primarily cooking on cast iron, what is your feedback on that?
Yeah, I know a lot of peers that say, don't do cast iron. I don't have an issue with it at all. I think it just has to be seasoned well, but I wouldn't cook on it all the time. I would say it like, if it sounds good for like a steak, I don't like, what would you, I think a steak would be something you'd like season it well. Like, so if you're making a steak and that's how you, saute it or whatever, then fine, but only use it just for that. It's not something that you should do on a regular basis. I would instead use something like a stainless steel or something that is more grain friendly.
Okay, good to know. And then let's see, we talked about beef liver and we talked about that. Let's see. And then I think how to maximize iron absorption. Did we talk about that a little bit?
I don't know if we said, the worst thing about me is that I am learning that I am becoming my father, and I talk in circles. So I may have addressed it a little bit, but I can make it more clear. Maximizing any type of absorption is working on your lifestyle. So if you are in a constant state of fight or flight, if you're running from a bear, your body's not going to be like, let me like stop, absorb, utilize these nutrients. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, like it's not going to be able to digest the foods properly. So chronic stress, never giving yourself a break, a full day of rest. If you're following me, then you probably know that's like what I'm obsessed with in this season of life. Not getting outside, not dealing with past traumas, current traumas. All of that can cause stress. Macronutrients imbalances. So we have to address stress in order to get max absorption. But little things that you can do while you're working through all of the harder, more emotional stuff is like things like bone broth that has a lot of L-glutamine that helps heal and seal the gut to be able to better absorb nutrients. One of my favorite tricks is actually throat coat tea. It's
so good.
It's so good. It's used for mucosal lining support, that slippery elm, as you would for your throat when you're sick. The same thing with your GI tract. Aloe, marshmallow root, all those things are really great at kind of soothing the mucosal lining and helping you absorb the nutrients that move iron better.
So just to wrap up, so basically like the gut is obviously the precursor to everything, but typically your approach would be to work on that gut so that we can better absorb the iron and utilize those nutrients and process it. But when you do that, do you feel like that's a huge improvement with clients?
Yeah, lifestyle is the number one thing I would say. So I would start with lifestyle. If you are not currently doing a full day of rest, that is something that like gives you a panic attack. That's something I would immediately address. I was actually just talking to a client that was a new client, and I was getting to know her, and we were talking about her history, and she was telling me how when she was a little kid, she did a lot of Broadway things, and she was always, her schedule is very packed. And likewise, it's carried through her entire adulthood to now. She's suffering from, a lot of digestive issues and hormonal issues. And she experienced a little bit as a kid. And that's because it's a really hard habit to break when we are not setting in time for rest and when we're not allowing our nervous system to calm back down. So I would say that the number one thing that if you are not implementing rest on a regular basis, that is the number one thing that you have to regulate back your nervous system. You have to calm back down. And also just for the fact that our health is an ongoing thing, and it takes endurance, and it takes the body's ability to endure well. And just like an athlete, in order to endure well, you really have to pace yourself. You have to rest. You have to participate in life a little bit and then keep going. We can't go, 90 miles an hour, or else we're going to burn out. So that's really important. Then I would say blood sugar all along while trying to eat whole foods. And if you're getting stuck from there, then it's probably time to see a practitioner.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that is a great timeline. So, well, I appreciate you so much for this conversation, and hopefully we'll meet in person someday.
Of course we
but if you can, leave with just where people can find you, how they can work with you, the resources that you have, and all of that.
Yeah. So my Instagram here, I don't know, can you see it? I don't know if you can see it on here. I'm the worst millennial. I have no idea how technology works. But so the Instagram, I have a lot of free resources. I do work with clients one-on-one. And you can reach out to me on Instagram or at contact@maglangston.com. I have a course. I have a macro guide if you're looking to figure out how much you want to eat or you need to eat throughout the day. And I've got some things in the work and a really big passion project that is hopefully coming out early next year. So that's all the things.
Can't wait. Okay. Well, I appreciate you again, and I'll post this to my Instagram as well for anyone that wants to watch. But I look forward to supporting you further.
Yay. Thank you. Well, it was so good to see you.
Thanks, Meg. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.